Hi guys, thanks for joining us in video 2. If you haven't checked out video 1, please go back and have a look. I talk you through my new winter blueprint system. I talk to you about how we're going to reapproach periodization, completely turns it on its head. I talk you through briefly the next stages in the blueprint, such as the pre-performance playbook, the strength and conditioning approach, and the secret little bonus that we have inside. So in video 1, I talk you through the key components very briefly. In today's video, I'm going to talk you through more in depth of the periodization approach and step by step how we implement it. So let's take a deeper look at the new periodization system. In phase 1, we've got the general adaptation phase, or the train to train phase. In this phase, the athlete's going to get used to our new approach. Depending on the level the athlete comes in at, we're going to generally progress them and get them used to our sessions as we go before we hit them with the hard stuff in phase 2. Phase 2 is the raising the roof phase, as we like to call it, or super threshold training. Phase 3 is the intensive endurance phase. This is also called the faster for longer phase. So while phase 2 was a super threshold phase, we learned to go fast. Phase 3 is faster for longer. So it's a bit of injection in the endurance kind of side of things there. So phase 4 is the pre-competition or the pre-race phase. This is where we work on anaerobic capacity and we start to bring in the endurance element as the weather starts to improve. So phase 1 is the general adaptation phase, or the train to train phase. So in this phase, a client comes in, like any other client, this is not a template. They'll come in, they'll get acquainted with their coach. The coach is going to implement a 20-minute FTP test. We're going to accurately map out their training zones, and that's the first stage before they hit the blueprint system. The general adaptation phase prepares the athlete for the demands of the next stage, or the phase 2 in our program. So it acts as a transition phase from the off-season into the next stage in our program. The main goal of this phase is to prepare the body for the demands of the next phase. The main goal of this phase is to prepare the athlete for the demands of the phases to come. This is done through implementing some of the key concepts of the phases to come, while simultaneously getting back into the rhythm of structured training. The contents of this phase will vary greatly from rider to rider, depending on the rider's condition going into this period. The results of this phase are hugely important. This determines the rate of progression in the following stages to come. Okay, so now we're getting into the meaty part of the program. We're hitting phase 2, raising the roof. So the raising the roof phase is a highly polarized phase. So what I mean by polarized is you're either training easy or you're training really hard. By hard I mean zone 5, and by easy I mean zone 1, zone 2. This polarized approach has been proven in a multitude of studies to be hugely effective at raising your FTP, your 5-minute power and your VO2 max. This polarized approach works on a scientific level by increasing your ability to produce less lactate at sub-maximal intensities. So your zone 1, zone 2, you produce less lactate. At the higher intensities, you can process more lactate. And what I mean by process lactate is you can clear it or you can tolerate more lactate. Okay, so why is this phase called raising the roof? In layman's terms, this stage is called raising the roof because of its two components. We've got the roof and we've got the ceiling. The roof is represented by your power of VO2 max, and the ceiling is represented by your FTP, or your functional threshold power. Right, so I'm going to visually represent what it's going to be like if we can increase the power of VO2 max, or the roof as we call it in layman's terms. So as you can see, what this does, if we can increase the roof, this has a knock-on effect on your FTP. It drags your FTP slightly up. The raising the roof phase also gives us a lot more room so we can push up the ceiling in the next phase. Okay, so a sample session from this phase might be something as simple as a 40-20 session. So this is a 40 seconds on, and the on is at upper zone 5 or VO2 max power, and your off is 20 seconds at zone 1, zone 2. You might do as much as 2 to 3 sets of this depending on your ability, with 10 minutes recovery between each set. So the next phase of the blueprint system is your intensive endurance phase. This phase largely comprises of zone 3, sweet spot and threshold training. So the goal of this phase is to go faster for longer. In phase 2, I talked about going fast, but at this stage, we're kind of progressed on to going faster for longer. This phase works by pushing your FTP, your functional threshold power, up from below, while simultaneously improving your work economy at intensities around the threshold region. So what I mean by work economy is it reduces the cost, or the energy cost of exercise at a given intensity. So I'm going to take you through this again in layman's terms using our roof and ceiling analogy. So in this phase, we're going to take advantage of our new and improved roof. So we've improved our VO2 max. So now we've got a lot more room to play with by pushing our ceiling, or our FTP, functional threshold power, up. So if we move our ceiling up, our ceiling, in other words, our functional threshold power rises as a result of doing zone 3, sweet spot, and functional threshold or lactate threshold efforts. So since the intensity stays high in this phase, we're not going to lose any of our top-end fitness from our previous phase. So the pre-season phase has arrived. This is the phase that's going to get you into the early season breakaways. It's a highly polarized approach. So we're going to be working on zone 1 and zone 2, and zone 6 and zone 7. So you're going to be working on anaerobic capacity and neuromuscular power. So So this is the phase where we start to work on endurance. This phase coincides with the longer days, so we can start to increase endurance without you out training in the crappy weather. So the pre-season phase, or phase 4, is the most polarized phase of our winter training blueprint. It's either zone 1 or zone 2, so really easy sessions, increasing that endurance, or else it's zone 6 and zone 7, absolutely maximal intensity. So this pre-season block of anaerobic capacity and neuromuscular power work, while lengthening your endurance or increasing your volume, leaves you race ready. So now you're not using the first few races of the season to catch up on your top end speed and power. We all know how it feels to get to that first race of the season, feeling slightly undercooked. You've done loads and loads of miles, you get a massive shock in the first attack of the year, you start to cramp towards the back end of the race. With this phase, it's going to leave you properly primed and ready to race. So one of the key elements of the winter training blueprint is when you start with your coach, is testing and reporting. So the first phase when you come in is you get an FTP test where the coach has established your training zones. So following phase 1, your general adaptation phase, we're going to run a power profile. And what I mean by a power profile is your coach is going to test you at each of the anaerobic intensities before you start your phase 2, which is raise the roof. This means following the raise the roof phase, your coach can hit you again with a power profile and exactly report your improvements over the duration of this phase. So following your raise the roof phase, you've done your power profile, you've gotten your results, you've seen how much you've improved. Now it's time to do an FTP test before your intensive endurance phase. This gives you and your coach a picture of where you're at an aerobic point of view before you do the intensive endurance phase. Following the intensive endurance phase, you're going to do another 20-minute FTP test to assess your improvements in the intensive endurance phase. Following phase 4, your pre-race phase, your coach is going to initiate 2 tests. Again, it's going to be a 20-minute FTP test and the power profile. And this is going to sum up the results of the whole 4-month system. So as you can see, a key element to this program is training something and then testing to see how it worked and mapping out or reporting your improvements. So as you can see, you don't have to do tons of miles over the winter period when the weather is absolutely shit. So the research has definitively shown that if you work on high intensity intervals over the winter period and your coach controls this properly, you will not peak too early or before the season. You will actually hit the season ready to race. So you can go into the races at the start of the season and get stuck in instead of using those races to develop as you go. As we've seen with Sean McKenna, he was in the first breakaway in January. He was also in the breakaway at the World Championships in September at the end of the year. So make sure you join me in the next video where I take you through step by step our pre-performance playbook. It's a series of online psychology resources to help you get the most out of your training and your racing next year. So I've got one more question for you guys. Can you stick this one in the comments below and tell me, have you hit previous seasons under-prepared? Has the first race been a shock to the system? And did you find that the first couple of races had to get under your belt before you started to perform? Pop them in the comments below.